Welcome to the Parent Talk podcast for primary years, and I'm joined today by Rob Parsons and Madeline Stanimeros. So,
Hi.
welcome.
Thank you.
As usual, we're looking at a scenario that we're going to discuss together, and this is it. I'm sick of nagging my children. Whether it's about getting dressed in the morning or putting their toys away, they just don't seem to listen. Any suggestions? So, Madeline, does that sound familiar?
Oh gosh, I'm sure it's familiar to everybody. Yes, I think you can get to a point, can't you, where you've repeated yourself so much, you become this kind of white noise in the house.
Yeah.
And I do think there are ways to tackle it, actually. And one of the ways we found helpful was to put consequences in place. But I would probably want to define what a consequence is versus a punishment. So quite often parents will come to me and they'll say, yes, we do consequences. And I'll say, well, give me an example. And they might say, well, I say, if you do that again, you can't have your bedtime story, or I'll take your Lego away, or you can't have your computer later. And they're assets stripped, but they're no wiser inside, And so a consequence, on the other hand, is something that's directly related to the scenario. So this person is having issues with their child not putting their toys away. I might say, well, all the toys you clear up, you get to keep. And then the others, they'll go in a box in the loft and we'll bring them out again next month. They start to grow inside and decide, how's this going to work out for me, rather than just responding to your commands.
Okay,
that's
so
one idea.
They have a bit of choice. I do, when you were speaking, I remembered that my husband, if he's stressed, he gets really cross about stuff being around the house. And sometimes it's his stuff, but that's another story. And when our children were little, there were often toys all over the floor, Lego and bits and pieces. And there was one day, and he said, if there's anything is left on the floor, it's going in the bin. And we'd been to the Bristol Zoo, and somebody had bought a plastic eagle, and this eagle was on the floor, and he put it in the bin. And our children still remember it now. They always taught them, do you remember the eagle? But they did learn a lesson. I have to say it didn't really work because they still left their stuff around. But,
it's radical, isn't it?
But following through. What do you think, Rob?
Well, I think it's a great idea, isn't it? I thought what Madeline said about white noise was fascinating, though, at the beginning.
Yeah.
The idea that we nag so much. And I think, we've had a phrase in Care of the Family down many, many years called choose your battles. And I think probably that's the first one. You can't fight every battle. If you do, two things will happen. Your kids will say, my mum and dad are always on my back, and worse still, they never know when something really matters to you. So it might be putting the toys away, or it might be cleaning out the hamster, or it might be doing this and that. But if you fight them all, you create what you said, this white noise. And I think the second thing about it is, and perhaps this might come into the same category, that sometimes we make threats or consequences, but we have no intention of carrying them through. And kids know that. We say, I won't tell you again, and they think, oh, she will. She'll probably tell me another 10 times yet when I'm just getting going. And in a sense, it's not fair to them because we don't really mean it. If you don't do this, I'll do this, but we don't follow through. And I think what you've said about the toys is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? We spend most of our time up and down the loft.
Well, you might for a while, and then they go, no, she's serious, she's really going to do this thing, we've got to clear the toys out. But I think you're absolutely right about the battles, and particularly if you're going to go the consequences route, because first off, it can feel, you really have to take courage and go through with it. And therefore, if you're going to tackle everything in family life, you're going to be exhausted. But if they've got a repetitive issue, like leaving their shoes all over the hall, for example, you can say, right, this week, that's what we're going to hardwire into our family and focus on that. Yeah.
I think we were chatting earlier, you told me something you did about that issue.
Well, yes, ours did do this. They come in, they kick their shoes off, and then their boots, and then their, rugby shoes are there. And I've got, there's 7 of us, so 14 pairs of shoes in the hall can be quite messy and dangerous. So my husband and I chatted, and right, we need a consequence for this one. And I decided what I was going to do was to take all of the shoes and just go down to the end of the garden and pop them in the shed. For somebody else, they might not have a garden, but they can come up with something that's inconvenient. And I did tell them I was going to do it, but, white noise. And sure enough, they come and they go, where are my rugby boots? I've got to go to rugby practice. I go, oh, sweetheart, they're down at the end of the shed, all lined up nicely. And you can see they're like, oh, you're kidding, you did it, right, okay. And then, 2 or 3 times later, you can see them putting their shoes down thinking, no way. And off they go and they pop them away. It's about building responsibility in the inside of them rather than kind of closhing them with rules, isn't it?
And so giving them choices. I know our oldest, I think probably we didn't do that well on this, but he was a Newcastle United fan and he loved his Newcastle United shirt. And we would say, yeah, we're going to confiscate your Newcastle United shirt. And this shirt spent more time on top of the wardrobe than it did on his back. And to be honest, it didn't really help him. He didn't really care by the end. He had other shirts he wanted to wear. So I think that idea of having a consequence that kind of fits a bit with the issue is really good.
Yeah. And you know what I think about all of this? Every child is different, every home is different. And I think it's important that people find things that work for them.
Definitely.
And try things. There's, we've often said, haven't we, there's no one way to be a perfect parent, but there's 100 ways to be a great parent. And actually what might work with one child won't work in exactly the same with that one. It will work at this age, but it won't work exactly the same. But I do think that the principles Madeline are talking about are strong ones. This idea of linking the consequence. I'll tell you who this is a killer for, though, is the very controlling parent. The parent that can't stop themselves. They always, don't do this, don't do that, and they're always on their kid's back. And unless they change, it won't just be a matter of nagging. I actually think that unless we learn to back off on some things, we sometimes drive a wedge between ourselves and our kids. We find it hard to recover from. So the truth is, as we said a moment ago, you can't fight all the battles, but you must fight some. Some years ago I was writing a book on parenting and I had dinner with a very eminent psychologist. And he said, you know what, Rob, some people make a mistake in parenting. They want to be their kid's best friend. That's okay, one day you might be the best friend, but don't have that as a goal. Because parents have to take hits in the popularity stakes.
They do.
Parents have to say no. And I think that's very important to grasp as well.
And I think you're right. And going back to that example of the shoes, you are going to risk popularity or your child's approval. So taking that example of the shoes down at the end of the shed, you will risk your child's approval. You're not going to get it. And when they come back, they're going to be furious. Mum, I can't believe you did that. That's so inconvenient. I'm late for rugby now. But that's your point, to feel empowered rather than coming back at them and just think, I know, sweetheart, I understand. That's really inconvenient. I'm sorry. That was the best I could come up with the problem of the shoes in the hall.
Yeah, so I think what's great about that is it takes the heat out of the issue. So whatever the issue is, if it's, they're chucking their coats in the hall, if it's not putting toys away, if it's not going upstairs for bath time when you've told them or whatever, it can so easily just the whole temperature in the house, I've told you, you don't do it, whereas actually making one thing like that and then saying, oh, I'm sorry, but that's what you chose, that was the consequence.
And you empower them.
Exactly. But also I think, so you've got those set consequences when you've said, because of that, this has happened and your choice, you put your shoes in the shoebox and you won't have to go down the garden and get them.
Yes.
But there's almost natural consequences as well. So I remember one Guy Fawkes evening here, we had a public bonfire firework party and our oldest was probably about 8, I think, and he refused to wear a coat. And it was freezing, it was November, it was 6 o'clock in the evening. And we had a row and we were all about to be late and I said, if you don't want to wear a coat, don't wear a coat. Your choice, but you will be cold and we're not coming back. Well, he was freezing. He was shaking away, but he was never going to admit he was freezing. I'd like to tell you that he always wore a coat after that. He didn't, but that was a natural consequence.
That's a natural consequence, and it does take some courage to follow through. But what you're doing is you're chopping off 6 more years of nagging over the coat. It's like, we've resolved this in one hit. Your choice, you choose what temperature you want to be tonight. And you mentioned sort of going up to bed and bath time, and I think just having a little consequence in mind for those things can be helpful. So our little one, he's 7 and the eldest is 21, and so it was quite hard actually enforcing the whole bedtime thing when the others were all up and around, but we really had to in order to sort of get him the sleep that he needed. So we would say to him, look, sweetheart, you're welcome to muck around, but you are eating into your story time. That's very different from saying, you carry on like that, you're not getting a story. It's that's fine, I'm timing you, you're eating into your story time. And then make sure you follow through and you do the one story and it comes to the second, you say, sweetheart, we haven't got time for that tonight because you chose, and always use the word chose, because you chose to play a little bit more downstairs, and they start going, I'm in charge of me. Yeah.
Which is equipping them for life, isn't it? And that's what
Yes.
we're about. There's a lovely phrase we often use, we're not raising children, we're not raising teenagers, we're actually raising adults. And that's what we're wanting to do, to equip them with those, the ability to make those good choices.
Yes.
I'll tell you what I think that's important is this whole thing is not so much about discipline. Most parents haven't got a tremendous desire to discipline their children. It's about security.
It is.
There is nothing more destined to breed insecurity in a child them to believe there are no boundaries and nobody cares if they cross them. And anyway, today it's putting their shoes away, but tomorrow we'll be getting a report in for their boss or crossing another line that will. So we're literally trying to mould them for life, aren't we? And that sense of security, which you mentioned in the case of your child, is actually true of every child, isn't it? This sense of this is how life works.
Yeah.
Guys, that is so helpful. And, I so wish I had really understood the difference between just the punishment and the consequences and empowering them when ours were little.
I did just want to add to that, actually, something that you said reminded me of it, that if they can see that when they go wrong, there's a consequence rather than a furious parent. As they get older, they will learn they can trust us with their wrongdoings. We're a home where it is safe to go wrong. Nobody's going to identify you by it or condemn you. It just means you have to clear up your own mess or walk in your own consequence.
Yeah, no,
Makes it safer for the teen years when they come along.
No, that is brilliant. I really like that phrase, let the consequence do the talking and allowing you. That's really helpful. Guys, thank you so much. That was great. And if you have a scenario and you would like to write to us at Care for the Family with that, and we use it in these Parent Talk Primary Years podcasts, we'd be delighted to send you a copy of my book. If you forget everything else, remember this: parenting in the primary years. So thank you.
You have been listening to the Parent Talk podcast for the primary years. For further information about our courses, resources and events, please visit us at careforthefamily.org.uk.